So at this time, I'd like to welcome you to our presentation today. And once again, thanks to Carolyn Washington, who has arranged all of this. And Carolyn, would you like to introduce our speaker for us?
Thank you very much. I would really like to take credit, but I cannot. I cannot take all the credit. It definitely has been a joint effort. I have loved being a part of the programming, the summer programming committee, but this wonderful lady, Celeste, she has just been so wonderful in helping me navigate getting her here. So, and I would do all of her credits a disservice if I tried to talk about all of her great work because it is there before you. And so, what do they say? I will let the pudding be in the demonstration. So,
Never heard that one before, but that's awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for letting me be here today. I'm really excited. Sometimes I speak really quickly when I'm excited. So just put your hand up and say, slow down. And I'd be proud to do that. Give you a quick introduction to who I am. I'm originally from New York City. Yay. No New York, no previous New Yorkers out there. I went to school in upstate New York in Siena College. I have a double master's degree in physical education as well as, see how nervous I am? In physical education as well as public administration. I have a career where I've done fitness, recreation, and education for the public as well as for the military. So I was able to retire early, yay, and pursue my next hobby, my next passion, which was art. And you're like, well, what does art have to do with quilt codes? In one of the shows that I attended, I met a quilter. Any quilters out there? Yes, we have several. Awesome. And we began to talk, and she showed me some of her designs, and she also mentioned quilt codes, and I was fascinated. So I went home and said, "Doot, doot, 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 doot. What's a quilt code?" Doot, 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 doot. And then I met with another quilter, and we ended up doing a show where she had her quilt code and I did quilt codes in glass and in glass beads. And that's what you see before you. In addition to that, I also learned a lot about quilt codes, and hence here I am. Now we have some quilters in the audience. Tell me about your quilts. Do your quilts mean things? Give me an example.
It's Zen.
It's Zen. Ah, all right.
Thank you. Um, Actually, my quilting come from my family from the early, I don't know, 1800s maybe,
Awesome.
out of Alabama. So I have a quilt from my late husband's grandmother, who was Creek Indian and also African American. And I still have that. And we have a family member, Susanna Hunter. Her quilts are hanging in the Ford Museum back in, I think it's in Michigan. Thank you.
So that's an example of all quilts have a meaning. Most quilters that I've met, they don't just arbitrarily make a quilt. There's a meaning behind it. Either it's a child's birthday, maybe they want to leave a lasting legacy. And that's what our quilt quotes were. But they had a meaning in other ways. They were done to help slaves leave their masters. Did you realize what the Underground Railroad means? Does anybody have any idea? And why it was called the Underground Railroad? Well, the master was running after his slave, and he got really, really close. They were at the Ohio River, and he turned around. He took his eyes off the slave for 1 second. And when he came back and looked, he said, it was as if he went under the ground. And from then, that's what it's been called, the route, the Underground Railroad. The information that I'm sharing with you was gleaned from the quilter that I met, as well as Hidden in Plain View. That is by Jacqueline Tobin and Raymond Dolan. I also have a book, Facts and Fabrication by Barbara Beckman. And I have a sample. I have the books here if you'd like to see that before you leave, as well as I have pieces that I've done in glass and glass beads that you can take a look at. The young lady that we got the information from, Hidden in Plain View, was by Miss Ozella, sorry. Unfortunately, she has passed away, but she was good enough to give that information, and it was written in book before she passed away. Any observations, any questions out there? I know we said we're going to leave until the end. All right, we're moving on. Do you realize that there were 4 million Africans that were brought over here? Did you realize there was that many? I had no idea it was that many. And if you talk to scholars nowadays, they tell us that they don't believe in quilt codes. Does anybody know anything about oral history? Oral history, it's a secret. Aha. And I'm sure that there are things that are in your family, that are in my family, that got passed down from Uncle John to Danny to that they tell you, well, you know, when so-and-so did so-and-so, it was da-da-da-da-da. So quilt codes is an oral history. It went down from one slave to the next slave to the next slave. So if scholars are saying that they don't see it, they don't see evidence of it, but if you talk to people in their history, in their families, yes, there's definitely quilts. So let's go through a couple of them. There are actually more than 20, but we're going to talk about 10 of them today. And then at the end of this discussion, I would like to possibly, if you're up for it, do a project where you bring on your own quilt code in glass, that which is my mosaic, which is my medium. The first code is the monkey wrench. This is according to Mrs. Adela. The monkey wrench, technical difficulties.
So Ruth Marie, this is a gorgeous outfit that you have on. While we're waiting for the technical issues to be resolved, I just wanted you to take just a couple of seconds to tell us just briefly where you got this and what's it all about.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And yes, I have been very fortunate, and I've done a lot of traveling since I was very young. One of my family members worked for the State Department. So this is a Sankofa dress.
Hey, Ruth, can you do me a favor and walk in front of the podium that way?
Yes,
To your,
absolutely.
just stand in front of the podium. We're in front of her. Keep going to your right. There. There you
My
go.
glasses so I can know where
Yeah.
I'm going. This is a Sankofa. And the Sankofa, there is an emblem, as you see on this particular dress, which was purchased in Ghana 25 years ago or more. And the Sankofa bird is symbolic of one's historical evolution. And that historical evolution takes you to your past, including quilt codes and quilting,
Very nice.
so that one would not be in bondage, one would not be enslaved. And so through the messaging, the bird, the Sankofa bird, means that we look back. We look back no matter who our ancestors are, but in particular, those of African ancestry, we look back so that we, as members of the human race, can take those lessons and incorporate them into our everyday existence, our everyday life, and our interface, our interactions with other human beings and within our communities. And we can learn very specific lessons that propel us to the next journey on this path of being responsible, committed, and people who gather together as a community to make a difference within our societies. This is the message of looking back at our history through the Sankofa vision, the Sankofa bird.
Very nice. Very nice. The first patch I'd like to talk about is the monkey wrench. The monkey wrench signified getting ready physically, getting ready mentally, getting ready any tools or coins or anything that you have. This was a signal to get everything going. Remember, not everyone in the plantation could leave. Maybe you were too young. Maybe you were too old. But this quilt was hung out over the porch for a couple of weeks so that people will get ready. Another way that Africans, enslaved Africans, got the message out that the quilt was out was they sang. And the song was, "Let us break bread together on our knees." Does anybody know that song? Let us break bread together on our knees. So people would know, there's a new quilt out. Let's go see what that is. Maybe let's go tell people in who are working in the fields. Let's tell other people, this is the quilt that's out. The next one in our series is the wagon wheel, or some people call it the carpenter's wheel. The way I have it expressed is in beads. Those are all glass beads that I put together. And that signified getting on the wagon, that your travel was going to be on wagon, and that you should get ready because you're going to be traveling by wagon. And the wagons were made by the blacksmiths, and they were really, really important because you know why? They had secret compartments. So one or two slaves could be traveling right under their master, and he'd never know it because they would hide him behind hay or whatever the product was that they were traveling with. So this is just to let people know that if you're going to escape, that a wagon was going to be available. Now remember, people had to commit this to memory. There was nothing on the trail that told them this. They had to commit this to memory. And sometimes way in the evening, they would go to the slave cemetery and also tell these stories. Again, oral history. Our next is the bear claw. Next patch. I've made the patch by beads in this one. And this is a beads as well as glass blocks. In the, well, you can't see me, huh? Well, I wanted to show that each four corners, you'll see the bear patch. And that's basically the bear claw or the bear path. What they're telling people is to make the way of the bear in the spring. And that's when most slaves left, was in the spring. Bears wake up. And what do? They need to find places to eat, and they need to find water. So this tells the slave to go follow the bear where they were going because they knew where the water was, they knew where the berry was, and they generally did not want to be around people when they were moving and grooving. Did you know that American Indians were very, very instrumental in slaves leaving as well? So the slaves also followed Indians' path. In our next slide, which I really, really love, and I did that also in beads, it's called the flying geese. I'm sure all of our quilters here have done that at least once. And you can change the direction. And again, when birds migrate, the majority of birds, when they migrate, they do it at night. Did you know that? That mostly and then geese in general are very, very loud. So you can follow the way of the geese and they migrate when they migrate north. Our next slide is the direction that you should be moving. The path, the straightest path between A and B is a straight line. But that's also the quickest way a master can find you. So this is called a drunkard's path, which means don't go straight. Go in a drunkard way. Go back and forth. Go up and back so you can mix up. The dogs will be like, whoa, 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 what's going on? Yeah, I can't get this. Go into the spring. Go to the water. Go back and forth. And eventually you will get to your place. But it's better to take the drunkard's path as opposed to a straight line. Our next slide is a shoe fly. The shoe fly was actually a person. The most famous shoe fly is Harriet Tubman. A shoe fly is the person that was going to lead you through your journey. Harriet Tubman took 19 trips and she saved over 300 folks to freedom. Harriet Tubman was a bad lady. She had a gun. And when you went with her, you either died or you were free. That's a good lady. Our next slide is the North Star. If you were escaping and you were all by yourself and you get confused, look up to the sky. The North Star is over Canada. Move in that direction. Most enslaved Africans left at night and traveled at night. They slept during the day and they traveled at night. So that's what they would use as their directional. The North Star is over Canada. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, Claude gave the slave master the opportunity to take slaves back, even though they've made it to Cincinnati, even though they made it to the north. So you had a choice. You could stay in Cincinnati or that area, or you can go to Canada where you don't have to worry about them maybe pulling you back into it. Our next slide is a log cabin. In between each safe house, which is the log cabin, was about 12 hours. So again, remember, you had to make sure that you knew that you could mentally stand it, that you were physically able. But when you saw this symbol and you saw the light in the window, then you knew that that was a safe house. Okay? our last one, one of our next to last ones is crossroads. Again, as I mentioned before about Cincinnati, or Ohio, once you got there, you needed to make a decision on whether you were going to stay there and live or keep on and go to Canada because, again, you can get clawed back after the 1850s. So the crossroads was a signal for that, or the symbol for that were embedded. The symbol that I like the best, and to me is the most significant, is the 9 patch. When a person reached Canada, for every 9 acres of land that they tilled, one was theirs, and they were free. Love that patch. We have an opportunity today to do an art project where you can do a modified 9 patch, or you can do a crossroads. And if you'd like to do that, just let us know, and we will do that together when we take all questions. That concludes my explanations.
Wow, what an education. Who knew all of this? So questions. Okay, let's start. I'll start up here and then I'll come back down.
If these symbolized, as you explained, I'm curious, like, wouldn't those symbols get to be known pretty quickly to everyone in the community? For example, if would someone hang a quilt outside a safe house that with this indication of safe house? Wouldn't that be pretty telltale to all the people you didn't want to tell? How did it work?
Most of the masters did not understand, did not know what the quilts meant.
Thanks. Did the colors have any significance, or could it be any color for the patterns?
Any color. They use scraps.
Oh, wait a minute. Wait for the mic. Nobody can hear you. Sorry.
We have a quilter here.
You have to remember they were slaves. There was no Joann's, Cali quilts, and so they're old clothing.
Into the microphone, please.
So they're old clothing.
Closer to your chin.
Okay.
There you go.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. But you have to remember they were slaves. The only clothing they had were from their masters after they did some kind of fancy dress for the master's wife or the children. And so there was nothing about colors and patterns, and they were working on escaping. They wasn't working on beautifying the quilt. So thanks.
Got a question up here, Deborah.
Hi, I'm not a quilter. I can barely sew a button. So excuse my ignorance, but how did the Africans learn to quilt? Did they quilt in Africa, or did someone teach them when they were brought over to America? And then second question is, if I'm escaping, are these quilts that give me the quilt code on trees or something? Again, I apologize. I don't quilt.
Most of the Africans who came here were skilled persons. They were artisans already. So they didn't need to learn how to quilt. They knew how to quilt. And these quilt codes were hung out at the plantation, and they had to commit them to memory.
Was there a point person that coordinated all of this? Like who was the point person that said, okay, that we're going to have a wagon that's leaving and they're leaving on Thursday or whatever? Who was that point person among the slaves?
The shoe fly,
I'm sorry?
the shoe fly.
The shoe fly. And can you explain that again, please? Or
It was like a Harriet Tubman. It was,
Yeah.
and sometimes they left on their own.
So this seems to be, yes, I am a quilter. So this was used as a means of communication. Who taught the slaves within the plantations what these codes or patterns meant?
They taught one another. That was the purpose of putting out a quilt and having it out there for some time. So they would talk within themselves, either, by going down to the graveyard in the dead of night, they would teach each other. And also through song.
So I'm not a quilter and I'm also a man, so I've already got 2 strikes. Some of the symbols I saw, like the bear claw, the North Star, you see the symbol. The first one you showed, the monkey wrench, I was thinking, did they have monkey wrenches back in 1850? It didn't look like my version of a monkey wrench. So could you show me why some of those had a name? The drunkard one I saw sort of, but some of them made no sense in terms of the name.
Well, as far as a monkey wrench goes, the blacksmith was called a monkey wrench. That's what they actually called him, a monkey wrench. So he was the most important person. Perhaps another quilter could answer the other question. The question was, why were some of the quilts called, the patches called what they were called? And he understood the log cabin. He understood the flying geese, but not the monkey wrench. Obviously, you understand the wagon wheel, yes? And the bear claw, the North Star. Flying geese, do you understand that? The flying geese? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to say there, excuse me, there are 2 important things that are combined in this presentation, because we have the quilts and the symbols or the codes on the quilts, but we also need a deeper understanding of the Underground Railroad. So I come from the East Coast, and I know a lot of you have lived on the West Coast forever. So I also come from the Eastern Shore, about 20 miles from where Harriet Tubman plied her trade. And so you have to understand that it was word of mouth. It was just passed from person to person. And what happened in Louisiana, different from what happened in Maryland, different from what happened in Pennsylvania. So there were similarities, and people knew, there were some people who might have known the whole path, but generally you were passed from one person who knew to another. And it's also, the Quakers were very instrumental in the Massachusetts and some of the eastern parts, and they would put out the quilts. So it wasn't just the African Americans who were using the quilts. There were other people who were white people and abolitionists who also used them. So I just think it's important to remember that it's not a monolithic idea, but it's very diverse.
Thank you.
Hello. I was just wondering if it seems like the beginning one would be out all the time, because weren't there most of the time, there were people that wanted to leave, slaves that wanted to leave. So was it just put out periodically and, once a month you'd go look, or, how was the system worked?
In the spring, it was most opportune time to leave. It wouldn't be out at winter time. And Harriet Tubman had 19 trips, but she didn't do that all the time. She had to wait for certain times. So there would only be certain times that certain quilts would be placed. And then, you know, for example, the first one would have to be out for at least a month or so prior to the second one coming out, just to so that everybody can talk about it, and the oral history, oral sayings could go through to the other plantations.
I had a quick question about where were the quilts hung or displayed around the plantation so that everyone could see them?
They were hung out. There's some that have been hung out on the barn, but normally they hang them out right, what should I say, over. Remember when we used to hang things out and beat them to dry or to on a porch? Yes, they were hung out on the porch.
Hi. My question would be in terms of do we have anything? Are there any quilts on display? And then maybe how many how many of these symbols might appear on a single quilt?
There are quilts on display from time to time in different history museums. I know in the California History Museum, they had a display with the pioneer women last year. And believe it or not, there's, as you know, as the quilters know, when you go to certain shows, there's a lot of people who do quilt codes and those shows. What was the second part of that?
The second part was how many of these symbols might we see on these quilts?
It depends on who's making the quilt. I've seen up to 12 symbols in one, and it was called a quilt sampler. And that started with the Jacob's ladder, and it goes right through to the 10th or 12th quilt. So pad, you know, it depends on how large they want to make the quilt.
Hi, right here. As a child, I would watch my father with working with tools and what have you, and he had a monkey wrench. A monkey wrench is basically a opening and closing wrench like any other wrench, but it is square in formation. It's a square opening, and so it would go around a square bolt or what have you. And I'm wondering, I'm guessing that that's the theory perhaps behind the square in the center. Just a thought.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. We have a question down here as well.
Oh dear. Oh, well. First, I would like to thank you. It was really informative and well presented. Thank you so much. And my question is, I've seen some of the quilts on display. There was an exhibit years ago in San Francisco at one of the museums. But what I'm interested to find out is, did very many of those quilts survive? And can you talk about that to today?
I'm only aware of the one that Frederick Douglass had as a survival. Miss Ozell had a quilt. Not sure of the survival of any of the other ones.
Yes, my question was regarding the railroad aspect, because I know even in navigation, they do have codes that look very similar to some of those quilts. And I wonder if anything got passed on in modern times, let's say, with coding versus navigation or railroad indication.
I don't know the answer to that.
The museum, Women's Museum in Washington, D.C. has had wonderful exhibits of quilts. And also here in California, there's quilting societies who have exhibited. Roseville was one of them, and Folsom had their recreation department had quite an exhibit. So this is, and people who are quilters meet, I don't know, maybe even people here are, part of local quilter society all over the country. And the books are amazing. So thank you so much for bringing this, to everyone's attention.
Is anybody interested in doing an art project based on that?
Oh, yes.
Oh, we have a couple of hands
I have,
up.
I have one
Yay.
question from the Zoom. Oh, actually, another one just popped in. It's kind of a interesting question. It says, there's a children's song, Shoo Fly, Don't Bother Me. Did the shoo fly in that song mean anything other than the insect and shooing it away?
I don't know.
I don't know either. There's someone mentions we should keep in mind some enslaved people escaped at their own time frame. Others waited for a signal to go with a group. Some ran upon learning that they would be sold. The quilt codes were not used at every plantation for everyone who escaped. It's one of the many ways the enslaved gained their freedom. Question, does the presenter only work with beads or does she make traditional quilts?
I don't make quilts at all. My specialty is in mosaics, and I chose this as a subject with the beads as well as stained glass.
Great, thank you. I think that's all the questions. Oh, wait, one back here.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's ever been like an estimate of how many people were successful in escaping through the Underground Railroad system. Has anybody heard any? I'm sure it's very hard to keep track of, but there must be some kind of estimate.
I don't have that information, but I will look. I will find it out. I'll go do, 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 do.
All right, I don't see any other questions.
Okay, so now we're looking for volunteers to come up and do an art project, correct, Celeste?
Well, they're gonna need to take it back to their seat, but yes.
Yes, so come on up.
Okay.
We
Yes,
could
come
probably
forward.
use these chairs here, Celeste, I think.
Yeah, perhaps.